What happens when Hollywood's toughest action star walks into what should be a friendly late-night interview, only to find himself face-to-face with a host who seems determined to tear him apart on live television? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on camera when Vin Diesel sat down with Jimmy Kimmel, and what started as promotion for his latest blockbuster turned into an absolute disaster that left everyone in the studio speechless. This is a story about respect, about crossing lines, and about what happens when someone pushes too far. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know what you think about this whole situation. Because trust me, you're going to have opinions after hearing what went down. So picture this. Vin Diesel walks onto the Jimmy Kimmel live set like he has dozens of times before. The audience is excited, the energy is high, and everyone expects the usual banter about Fast and Furious, family, and maybe some behind-the-scenes stories from his latest project. Diesel sits down in that familiar guest chair, flashes his trademark, smile to the crowd, and settles in for what should be a standard promotional interview. The studio lights are bright, the cameras are rolling, and millions of viewers at home are tuning in expecting nothing more than entertainment and maybe a few laughs. But from the very first question, something feels different. There's an edge to Kimmel's voice, a sharpness that cuts through the usual late-night charm like a knife through butter. Instead of the typical warm welcome that guests usually receive, instead of the friendly banter that makes these shows so popular, Kimmel opens with what sounds like a backhanded compliment about Diesel's acting range. He mentions how some actors really stretch themselves with challenging roles, while others find their niche and stick with what works. The comment hangs in the air for a moment, loaded with implication, and you can see Diesel's expression shift slightly as he tries to read whether this is just Kimmel's usual sarcastic humor or something more pointed and personal. The audience laughs, but it's that uncomfortable kind of laughter that happens when people aren't sure if they should be laughing at all. You know that feeling when you're watching something and you can't quite tell if it's supposed to be funny or if something darker is happening beneath the surface. That's exactly what's happening in this moment, and the experienced television audience can sense it, even if they can't quite put their finger on what's wrong. Diesel handles it professionally at first, giving a measured response about his passion for the craft and his commitment to bringing authenticity to every role he takes on. He talks about the months of preparation that go into each character, the physical training, the emotional work, and how much he values the opportunity to tell stories that resonate with audiences around the world. It's a genuine, heartfelt response that shows his dedication to his work and his respect for the craft of acting. But Kimmel doesn't let up. Instead of moving on to safer ground, instead of acknowledging Diesel's thoughtful response and shifting to more traditional interview territory, he doubles down with another comment that cuts even deeper. He starts talking about how action stars don't really need to act in the traditional sense, how they just need to look tough and say their lines convincingly enough to sell tickets. The words land like a slap across the face, and suddenly the atmosphere in the studio changes completely. You can see Diesel's jaw tighten as he processes what just happened. His hands, which had been relaxed on the armrests of his chair, now grip slightly as he realizes this isn't friendly ribbing between host and guest. This feels personal and deliberate. The audience starts to sense the tension too, and the laughter becomes more scattered and uncertain. People are looking around at each other, trying to figure out if this is some kind of planned bit or if they're witnessing something unscripted and potentially explosive. Diesel leans back in his chair, takes a deep breath, and you can almost see him deciding how to respond to what just happened. This is a man who's built his career on playing characters who face impossible odds with dignity and strength. And right now he's drawing on that same inner reserve to handle a situation that's rapidly spiraling out of control. This is where things start to get really interesting, because Diesel doesn't back down or laugh it off like many guests might do in this situation. Instead of changing the subject or making a joke to diffuse the tension, He looks directly at Kimmel with those intense eyes that have stared down countless movie villains and asks him to clarify what he means by that comment. The question is polite but firm, delivered with the kind of controlled intensity that makes everyone in the room pay attention. The studio falls into a moment of complete silence as everyone waits to see how Kimmel will respond. This is the moment where he could apologize, could clarify that he was just joking around, could steer the conversation back to safer territory. But instead, Kimmel makes a choice that changes everything that happens next. Kimmel chooses to commit to whatever game he's playing, and that decision transforms what could have been a minor, uncomfortable moment into something much more serious and confrontational. He starts talking about how some actors really challenge themselves with difficult roles, taking on Shakespeare or complex dramatic pieces that push their abilities to the limit, while others stick to what's safe and profitable, essentially creating a hierarchy of artistic merit that puts Diesel's work at the bottom. He doesn't mention Diesel by name in this comparison, but the implication is crystal clear to everyone watching. The host is essentially suggesting that franchise filmmaking, action movies, and the kind of entertainment that Diesel has built his career on is somehow less valid or artistic than other forms of acting. It's condescending, it's dismissive, and it's exactly the kind of intellectual snobbery that drives working actors crazy. The studio audience goes completely silent now. This isn't entertainment anymore. This is becoming something else entirely. Something that feels more like a public humiliation than a promotional interview. Diesel sits forward in his chair, and his voice drops to that low, controlled tone that anyone who's seen his movies knows means trouble is coming. The change in his demeanor is subtle, but unmistakable, like watching a storm system move in on the horizon. He asks Kimmel directly if he has something specific he wants to say about his career choices, because if he does, maybe they should address it directly instead of dancing around it with passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults. The question hangs in the air like a challenge, giving Kimmel one last opportunity to back down, to apologize, to acknowledge that he's crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. The tension in the studio is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The camera operators are adjusting their angles, trying to capture every nuance of this unprecedented confrontation. The producers are probably frantically trying to figure out how to salvage this interview, whether to cut to commercial, whether to try to intervene somehow. The band members are sitting there looking uncomfortable, probably wondering if they should start playing music to break the tension. And Kimmel, despite having multiple opportunities to defuse the situation, despite seeing the warning signs written all over Diesel's face and body language, makes the decision that ultimately leads to everything falling apart. Instead of backing down or apologizing, instead of acknowledging that he's pushed too far, he keeps pushing. He starts talking about box office numbers versus critical acclaim, about franchise films versus prestige projects, about commercial success versus artistic integrity. With every word he speaks, he's essentially telling one of Hollywood's biggest stars that his career choices are somehow less valid, less important, less worthy of respect than the work of actors who choose different kinds of projects. It's the kind of attitude that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what entertainment is supposed to be about. Diesel has spent decades creating characters and stories that bring joy to millions of people around the world, that inspire kids to believe in themselves, that celebrate friendship and loyalty and the importance of family. But Kimmel seems to think that because these stories are popular and commercially successful, they're somehow less valuable than more serious, dramatic work. Diesel's response comes swift and direct, cutting through Kimmel's pretentious monologue, like a blade through paper. He tells Kimmel that he didn't come on the show to be lectured about his career by someone who makes jokes for a living, and the way he says it leaves no room for misinterpretation. The gloves are officially off now, and what started as passive-aggressive needling has become an open confrontation between two very different men with very different ideas about respect and professionalism. The power dynamic in the room shifts. dramatically in this moment. Suddenly, Kimmel isn't the confident host controlling the conversation from behind his desk. He's a man who's just been called out by someone who commands genuine respect in the entertainment industry. Someone who's worked with legendary directors and actors. Someone who's built a career on more than just clever one-liners and celebrity gossip. Kimmel's face flushes red as he realizes his guest just called him out in front of his own audience, on his own show, in front of millions of viewers watching at home. But instead of taking the hint and trying to diffuse the situation, instead of recognizing that he's created a problem that's quickly getting out of hand, he doubles down again with the kind of stubborn pride that turns minor conflicts into major disasters. He starts talking about how actors should be able to take criticism and honest discussion about their work, completely missing the point that there's a fundamental difference between honest discussion and public humiliation disguised as comedy. He suggests that if Diesel can't handle having his work questioned or analyzed, maybe he's not as confident in his choices as he claims to be. It's a cheap shot that reveals how little Kimmel understands about the situation he's created. Diesel interrupts him mid-sentence, and his voice carries that quiet intensity that makes everyone in the room pay attention. He explains that he's been in this business for decades, that he's worked with some of the most respected directors and actors in Hollywood, that he's put his heart and soul into every project he's ever been part of, and that he doesn't need career advice from someone whose biggest contribution to entertainment is making fun of other people's hard work. The words hit Kimmel like a physical blow, and you can see the moment when he realizes that his attempt at edgy comedy has backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The audience doesn't know how to react anymore. Some people are still laughing nervously. Others are just staring in stunned silence, and you can feel the energy in the room shifting as people realize they're witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. This isn't a planned bit or a staged controversy designed to generate buzz and social media clips. This is two grown men having a real conflict on live television, with real emotions and real consequences. It's the kind of raw, unfiltered moment that rarely happens in the carefully controlled world of television entertainment. Kimmel tries to regain control by making another joke, something about how sensitive some people get when you question their artistic integrity. It's exactly the wrong thing to say at exactly the wrong moment, revealing that he still doesn't understand the gravity of what's happening. The joke falls flat, met with uncomfortable silence from an audience that's no longer sure what they're supposed to be laughing at. Diesel's reaction is immediate and powerful. He stands up from his chair, and suddenly his physical presence dominates the entire set. This is a man who's spent decades playing characters who command respect, who stand up to bullies, who refuse to back down when they're in the right. And right now, he's bringing all of that energy to bear on a late-night talk show host who clearly didn't think through the consequences of his actions. Standing at his full height, Diesel looks down at Kimmel and tells him that if he wants to continue this conversation, they can do it properly, but not as part of some cheap entertainment where the host gets to take shots and hide behind the format of the show. He points out that he's been respectful since he walked in, that he's answered questions professionally, that he's tried to engage in good faith, and that he deserves the same treatment in return. The production team is clearly in panic mode now. You can see people moving around behind the cameras, stage managers talking urgently into their headsets, probably getting instructions from producers about how to handle this unprecedented situation. The band is sitting there looking uncomfortable, unsure whether they should start playing music or just wait to see what happens next. But Kimmel still doesn't back down. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's stubbornness, maybe it's the pressure of being on live television and not wanting to appear weak in front of his audience. Or maybe he genuinely believes he's in the right. Whatever the reason, he keeps pushing, digging himself deeper into a hole that he's not going to be able to climb out of. He starts talking about how guests should expect to be challenged when they come on talk shows, how that's part of the job of being a public figure, how honest discourse is more valuable than polite small talk. He's trying to frame this as being about journalistic integrity or meaningful conversation, but everyone can see what's really happening. This isn't about challenging guests or creating meaningful dialogue. This is about a host who's lost control of his own show and is too proud to admit it. Diesel cuts him off again, and this time his voice carries a warning that even someone as oblivious as Kimmel can't miss. He explains very clearly that there's a difference between challenging someone and disrespecting them, between asking tough questions and being deliberately insulting, between creating good television and creating a hostile environment that no professional should have to tolerate. Making one final fatal mistake in his handling of the situation, perhaps driven by desperation or a misguided attempt to reassert his authority as the host, Kimmel interrupts Diesel's explanation and makes a dismissive comment about prima donna behavior and celebrity egos. The words barely leave his mouth before everyone in the studio realizes he's just crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, that he's turned a salvageable situation into a complete disaster. Diesel turns back to face Kimmel with an expression that would make his Fast and Furious co-stars take a step back. His voice drops to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carries more weight than if he had been shouting. He tells Kimmel that he's clearly more interested in creating drama than having a real conversation, and that he won't be part of whatever twisted version of entertainment this has become. The actor begins to remove his microphone, moving with deliberate, controlled motions that somehow feel more intimidating than any action sequence he's ever filmed. As he unclips the small device, he explains to Kimmel that respect is a two-way street, and that if the host can't provide basic courtesy to his guests, then maybe he shouldn't be inviting people onto his show in the first place. So what did you think about this whole situation? Was Diesel right to walk off, or should he have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one, because trust me, Hollywood is full of moments like these that never make it to the mainstream media.